This is Sabriel by Garth. Prologue. It was little more than 3 miles from the wall into the old kingdom, but that was enough. Noonday sunshine could be seen on the other side of the wall in Celestier, and not a cloud in sight. Here there was a clouded sunset, and a steady rain had just begun to fall. Coming faster than the tents could be raised, the midwife shrugged her cloak up against her neck and bent over the woman again, raindrops spilling from her nose onto the upturned face below. The midwife's breath blew out into a cold cloud of white, but there was no answering billowing from the air from her patient. The midwife sighed and slowly straightened up, that single movement telling the watchers everything they needed to know. The woman who had staggered into their forest camp was dead, only holding on to life long enough to pass it on to the baby at her side. But even as the midwife picked up the pathetically small form beside the dead woman, it shuddered within its wrappings and was still. "The child, too?" asked one of the watchers, a man who wore a mark of the charter fresh drawn in wood ash upon his brow. "Then there shall be no need for a baptism." MP! Hey, this is your third time hearing this. Oh, thanks for being here, man. His head went up to brush the mark from his forehead, and then suddenly stopped as a pale white hand gripped his and forced it down in a single swift motion. "Peace," said a calm voice. "I wish you no harm." The white hand released its grip, and then the speaker stepped into the ring of firelight. The others watched over him without welcome. The hands of the half-sketched charter marks or gone to the bowstrings and hilts did not relax. The man strode towards the bodies and looked upon them. Then he turned to face the watchers, pushing his hood back to reveal someone who had taken paths far from sunlight, for his skin was deathly white. "I am called Abhorsen," he said, as his words sent ripples through the people about him, as if he had cast a large, weighty stone into a pool of stagnant water. "And there will be a baptism tonight." The charter mage looked down on the bundle in the midwife's hand and said, "The child is dead, Abhorsen. We are travelers. Our life lived under the sky, and it was often harsh. We know death, Lord." "Not as I do," replied Abhorsen, smiling as his paper-white face crinkled at the corners and drew back from his equally white teeth. "And I say the child is not yet dead." The man tried to meet Abhorsen's gaze, but faltered and looked away at his fellows. None moved or made any sign, till the woman said, "So, it is easily done. Sign the child, Ariel. We will make a new camp in Leovi's Ford. Join us when you are finished here." The charter mage inclined his head to assent, and the others drifted away to pack up their half-moved camp, slow with the reluctance of having to move, but filled with the greater reluctance to remain near Abhorsen, for his name was one of secrets and unspoken fears. When the midwife went to lay the child down and leave, Abhorsen spoke. "Wait, you will be needed." The midwife looked down on the baby and saw that it was a girl child and, save for its stillness, could be merely sleeping. She had heard of Abhorsen, and if the girl could live, warily she picked up the child again and held it out to the charter mage. "If the charter does not," began the man, but Abhorsen held up his pallid hand and interrupted. "Let us see what the charter wills." The man looked at the child again and sighed. Then he took a small bottle from his pouch and held it aloft, crying out a chant that was the beginning of a charter, one that listed all things that lived, or grew, or once lived, or would live again, and the bonds that held them all together. As he spoke, the light came to the bottle, pulsing with the rhythm of the chant. Then the chanter was silent. He touched the bottle to the earth, then to the sign of wood ash on his forehead, and then upended it over the child. A great flash lit the surrounding woods as the glowing liquid splashed over the child's head, and the priest cried, "By the charter that binds all things, we name thee!" Normally, the parents of the child would then speak the name. Here, only Abhorsen spoke, and he said, "Sabriel." As he uttered the words, the wood ash disappeared from the priest's forehead and slowly formed on the child's. The charter had accepted the baptism. But she is dead!" exclaimed the charter mage, gingerly touching his forehead to make sure the ash was truly gone. He got no answer, for the midwife was staring across the fire at Abhorsen, and Abhorsen was staring at nothing. His eyes reflected in dancing the flames, but did not see them. Slowly, the chill mist began to rise from his body, spreading toward the man and midwife, who scuttled to the other side of the fire, wanting to get away, but now too afraid to run. He could hear the child crying, which was good. Oh, let me pause here. Need a drink. Everybody good so far? Okay. He could hear the child crying, which was good. If she had gone beyond the first gateway, he could not bring her back without more strenuous preparations and a subsequent delusion of her spirit. The current was strong, but he knew this branch of the river, and waded past pools and eddies that hoped to drag him under. Already he could feel the waters leeching his spirit, but his will was strong, so they took only the color, not the substance. He paused to listen, and hearing the crying diminish, hastened forward. Perhaps she was already at the gateway and about to pass. The first gate was a veil of mist, with a single dark opening where the river poured into the silence beyond. Abhorsen hurried towards it and then stopped. The baby had not yet passed through, but only because something had caught her and picked her up. Standing there, looming up out of the black waters, was a shadow darker than the gate. It was several feet higher than Abhorsen, and there were pale marsh lights burning where you would expect to see eyes, and the fetid stench of a carrion rolled off it, a warm stench that relived the chill of the river. Abhorsen advanced on the thing slowly, watching the child it held loosely in the crook of its shadowed arm. The baby was asleep, but restless, and it squirmed towards the creature, seeking a mother's breast, but it only held her away from itself, as if the child were hot or caustic. Slowly, Abhorsen drew a small silver handbell from the bandolier of bells across his chest. and cocked his wrist to ring it. But the shadow thing held the baby up and spoke in a dry, slithery voice, like a snake on gravel.
"Spirit of my spirit of Horson, you can't spell me while I hold her, and perhaps I shall take her beyond the gate, as her mother has already gone."
Abhorsen frowned in recognition and replaced the bell. "So, you have a new shape, Carigor? And you were now this side of the first gate? Who was foolish enough to assist you so far?" Carigor smiled widely, and Abhorsen caught a glimpse of fires burning deep in his mouth.
"One of the usual calling," he croaked, "but unskilled. He didn't realize it would be in the nature of an exchange. At last, his life was not sufficient for me to pass the last portal, but now you have come to help me."
"I, who chained you beyond the seventh gate?"
"Yes," whispered Carigor. "The irony does not, I think, escape you. But if you want the child—"
He made as if to throw the baby into the stream, and then, with a jerk, woke her. Immediately she began to cry, and her little fists reached out to gather up the shadow stuff of Carigor, like the folds of a robe. He cried out, tried to detach her, but the tiny hands held tightly, and he was forced to overuse his strength, and threw her from him. She landed, squalling, and was instantly caught up by the flow of the river. But Abhorsen lunged forward, snatching her from both the river and Carigor's grasp. Stepping back, he drew the silver bell one-handed, and swung it so it sounded twice. The sound was curiously muffled, but true, and the clear chime hung in the air, fresh and cutting, alive. Carigor flinched at the sound and fell backwards to the darkness that was the gate.
"Some fool will bring me back, and then—"
he cried out, as the river took him under. The water swirled and gurgled, and then resumed their steady flow. Abhorsen stared at the gate for a time, and sighed, and placed the bell back in his belt. Looking at the baby held in his arm, she stared back at him, dark eyes matching his own. Already the color had been drained from her skin. Nervously, Abhorsen laid a hand across the brand on her forehead and felt the glow of her spirit within. The charter mark had kept her life contained when the river should have drained it. It was her life spirit that had so burned Carigor. She smiled up at him and gurgled a little, and Abhorsen felt a smile tilting the corner of his own mouth. Still smiling, he turned and began the long wade back up the river, to the gate that would return them both to their living flesh. The baby wailed, and scant second before Abhorsen opened his eyes, so that the midwife was already halfway around the dying fire, ready to pick her up. Frost crackling on the ground, and icicles hung from Abhorsen's nose. He wiped them with his sleeve, and leaned over the child, much as any anxious father does after a birth. "How is the babe?" he asked, and the midwife stared at him wonderingly, for the dead child was now loudly alive, as deathly white as he. "As you hear, my lord," she answered. "She is very well. It is perhaps a little cold for her." He gestured at the fire and spoke a word, and it roared into life, the frost melting at once, the raindrops sizzling into steam. "That will do till morning," said Abhorsen. "Then I shall take her to my house. I have need of a nurse. Will you come?" The midwife hesitated, and looked at the charter mage, who still lingered on the far side of the fire. He refused to meet her gaze, and she looked down once more at the little girl bawling in her arms. You are, whispered the midwife.
A necromancer?
Answered Hevorson. Only of a sort. I love the woman who lies here. She would have lived if she had loved another, but she did not. Sabriel is our child. Can you not see the kinship? Lude. The midwife looked at him as he leant forward and took Sabriel from her, rocking her on his chest. The baby quieted, and in a few seconds was asleep. Yes, said the midwife, I shall come with you and look after Sabriel, but you must find a wet nurse. And I dare say much else besides, mused Abhorsen. But my house is not a place for... The charter mage cleared his throat and moved around the fire. If you seek a man who knows a little of the charter, he said hesitantly, I should wish to serve, for I have seen its work in you, Lord, though I am loath to leave my fellow wanderers. Perhaps you will not have to, replied Abhorsen, smiling at a sudden thought. I wonder if your leader will object to 2 new members joining her band. For my work means I must travel, and there is no part of the kingdom that has not felt the imprint of my feet. Your work? Asked the man, shivering a little, though it was no longer cold. Yes, said Abhorsen. I am a necromancer, but not of the common kind. Where others of the art raise the dead, I lay them back to rest. And those that will not rest, I bind, or try to. I am Abhorsen. He looked at the baby again and added, almost with a note of surprise, Father of Sabriel.